Dungeons and Dragons.
Hey,
What a
Will,
board game.
there's like an extra
Oh, what is that?
window of something sharing on your screen. So,
Oh, you know what? There. Sorry
got
about
it.
that. Also, for those folks who are saying D&D, I think you should also be required to list your favorite class and what you like to run as your main.
It's over my head, I'm afraid. I don't understand that one. So people are still coming in at a fair old rate, so I'm going to just give it a minute or two, and then we will kick off. Bruce, Risk, classic. Okay, I think we'll crack on. We've got an enormous amount to get through, and as people join, I'm sure they can catch up. So hello everyone, and welcome to the 2024 UK and Ireland Charity Digital Benchmark Study. So great to see so many of you on the call. I think we had about close to 600 or maybe 700 registrations, and at the moment we've got around 200 people on the call. So lots of people expecting the recording, but it's great to have so many of you with us today. I mentioned earlier on, as people coming on the call, it'd be great if you could just drop your name, location, organization into chat, and we have a gaming theme, so tell us your favorite board game. We're really excited to be with you today to share the results of the 2024 UK and Ireland Charity Digital Benchmark Study. This is the third year that we've run it with M&R, and it's the first year that we've included Irish charities in the study. So a huge and big welcome to our friends in Ireland, and a big thank you to Ask Direct, the agency based in Dublin, who we partnered with to promote the study in Ireland. And of course, a massive and huge thank you to all of the UK participants who, without you and without our friends in Ireland, there would be no study. So thank you very, very much. We'll get into the details of the study and participants in a short while, but I just wanted to say that the website is now live. So after the call, you can drill into all of the data. But what we've got for you today is a run through with friends from M&R of all of the key points, and we're hoping that there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. Just a housekeeping point, it would be amazing if you could use the Q&A function to ask questions as we go through, and we will answer those questions as we go through, or maybe save some of them to the end. And use the chat where you're all at the moment, with setting your settings to everyone, not just hosts and participants. And in chat, you can show your love, your appreciation, and your amazement for in the data that we're going to be sharing with you today. Just going to quickly introduce myself. So I'm Paul, and I'm the founder of Rally. Rally helps our client partners mobilize and inspire the public at scale to take online and offline actions in order for our clients to win on the issues that they and the public stand for. So recent and current clients include Refuge, Mermaids, Praxis, Client Earth, Cancer Research UK, and Hope Not Hate. That's what I'm going to say about Rally. We have a website. I'm quite gobby on the internet. I'm sure you'll be able to find me if you want to connect there. Wanted to take a brief minute to talk about why we're so happy to be partnering again with M&R to bring digital benchmarks to the UK for the third time. So M&R have been running their benchmark study in the US for over 20 years now. It's a study I fell in love with many, many, many years ago. It really is a magnificent study. I had always used it to figure out how UK organizations were doing against what we were seeing in the US, but obviously had always been worried that US data wasn't UK data, and we were not really comparing apples with apples. We're really of the opinion at Rally that good data helps us all make better decisions. You know, without good data, we see myths build up, we see opinions rather than facts take hold, and at times we've seen poor performance being accepted as the norm, or in some cases presented as success. So partnering with M&R and producing a UK and Ireland study feels like a big deal for the sector, as it means we have access to the same quality of benchmark data as our friends in the US. So we hope that you get a lot out of today, you get a lot out of the report, and we hope this data helps drive your continued success, but also our collective ambition to do better as a sector. I'm going to shut up. I'm now going to hand over to Will from M&R to introduce himself and start to take you through the study.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Will Valverde. I'm a senior creative director at M&R, and I'm the lead writer of Benchmarks. This is my 13th year being the lead writer of Benchmarks, so I'm very excited to have such a wide cohort of participants this year, and I really appreciate that we have been able to expand our study to include groups in the UK and Ireland. M&R, very quickly, we are an agency based in the US. We work with nonprofits of all types to raise money and drive action and change policy in a wide variety of issue areas. There's information about us there on the websites. You know how the internet works. Let's get into more of the interesting stuff. We do have a lot to go through, and you don't want to listen to me talk about all of it. It's going to be a lot. So I'm going to be joined today by a few of the folks who helped pull this study together. We will, as mentioned, be recording this webinar and sharing it with the registrants within a day or so. And again, all of the information that we're presenting here and more that we were not able to fit into this slide deck can be found at mrbenchmarks.com/UK. The main global study is also available at mrbenchmarks.com, also known as mrbenchmarks.com. That's easier to remember. Again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and not the chat. The chat is for heckling. Once again, I do want to really thank participants who contributed data and answered questions for us. It really makes this study be as robust as we can make it. All of the findings that we have are improved by having access to as much data as possible. If you're one of the participants, please say so in the chat and know that you have our thanks and appreciation. It is a certain amount of work to participate, and we are very grateful for our participants. As you can see here, we do divide up our participants by sector. So as we go through the charts, you're going to see places where we list an overall metric, oftentimes broken up between our UK and Ireland cohort and the other countries. And then we will oftentimes break out by sector. If you're not sure which of these applies to you, you can see a full list of participants on the website, so you can kind of see where your peers are. And there will be places as well where one or more sectors is not shown on a chart. Anytime that happens, it's not because we forgot about them. It's because we didn't have enough data contributions from enough participants in that sector to give a reliable average, so we've taken them out. So if you're the rights group, for example, here we only had 4 participants. Any cases where one or more of them were unable to provide data, we might have to drop them off the chart. So that's what's going on there. I promise we'll get into the findings very soon. Before we do, a couple of things just to help you make sense of what we're going to be showing. Again, the sector I just explained. We also separate our participants by size. By size, we mean small is all those organizations that raised £500,000 or less in 2023 online over the whole year. Those raising between £500,000 and £3 million over the course of the year count as medium, and any groups raising more than that are classified as large for the purposes of our study, although we love them all equally. Whenever we talk about an average in the course of benchmarks, we are referring to the median figure. That means the number that's right in the middle. Half participants had a number higher than that, half had a number lower. We use that instead of a traditional mean average so that we can avoid having 1 or 2 outliers really swaying the average that we're showing. Whenever we talk about year-over-year change, we are looking at this year's participants and looking at their historical results. We are not going back to last year's study and comparing the numbers we reported there. It's a different set of participants from year to year, and so that wouldn't really be a great comparison. It'd be very misleading to look at different groups and their past experience. And then finally, all of the financial metrics that we report have been normalized to British pounds. So whatever currency is used by the organization, we have converted all of those to pounds. We use the exchange rates as of January 1st this year to convert those. Those were not dramatically different, so you can get a rough sense of the scale just by treating this 1-to-1, but just so you know, it is £1 to $1.27 and £1 to 1.1 euros. Okay, that's enough of the preamble. Let's start actually looking at some findings. We have a lot of very detailed charts to share. We're going to ease our way in by just looking at a couple of big numbers. The big numbers are actually kind of small. This is looking at the year-over-year change for online revenue overall across our participants. On average, revenue was flat year over year for organizations in the UK and Ireland. It's not a thrilling result. We're looking at like, oh, well, 0% change. That's not very exciting. But I think for a lot of folks who have worked really hard just to keep things going in this current very difficult environment, keeping pace with the previous year can feel like a victory. If that sounds like you and your experience, please know that you are not alone. And just to put that into a little bit more context, when we look outside the UK and Ireland, and this is primarily US-based organizations, when we say outside or other countries, most of them are in the US, although we have some groups in Australia, Canada, I think that's it. The Netherlands, I think we have one. When we look outside the UK and Ireland, the average year-over-year change was a 2% decline in online revenue, so a slight dip. As with many of our metrics, we saw a fair amount of variation when we break things down a little bit further, so we're going to take a look at that now. This is that same metric, change in online revenue year over year from 2022 to 2023 calendar year. And now we have them broken out by sectors and sizes. We see that wildlife and animal welfare groups saw the largest drop in revenue at an 8% decline year over year. At the high end, we saw that health organizations reported average online revenue growth of 9% year over year, so pretty positive result there. But for most groups, we are seeing a relatively small change year over year in online revenue. That's from 2022 to 2023. The reality is that when we're looking at year over year change, a lot really depends on the baseline. And when we take a step back, what we see is that the landscape that we have for online fundraising over the last several years is still really dominated by a big shift that we saw in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. Across the board, we saw an average increase that was much more dramatic in some areas than in others. Let's take a look at how that looks now. Okay, so this is still the same metric. We're looking at year-over-year changes in online revenue overall, but now we're looking back year-over-year for the past 4 years. So we can see the 0% change year-over-year in 2022 to 2023. The previous year, a 5% increase in revenue. We're looking at that on the leftmost set here. The year before that, a 5% increase, not bad, 5% year-over-year growth. And then in the first year of the pandemic, an 86% increase in year-over-year revenue online for groups in the UK and Ireland. That is a big, big jump. And so since then, what we have really seen is sort of a stabilizing around the higher level of fundraising that we saw that was sort of sparked by the first year of the pandemic when people really gave generously, saw the need around them, and really responded. And so while we tend to really focus on sort of what is happening right now, what happened in the last year, it's impossible to understand the current environment without acknowledging that where we are now is really sort of a stabilizing, plateauing from where we were a few years ago. And all of the changes since then have been relatively minor compared to that higher baseline. Now that we have a better sense of that long-term context, we can get at some of the nuance in last year's data. So again, we're now shifting our view back to just the year-over-year change from 2022 to 2023. Overall, it's true that online revenue held steady. But when we look at giving by type, we see a really clear pattern. Cash giving declined by 6%, while revenue from regular giving increased by 6%. So those people making a gift just once, that happened, 6% less revenue. Those who are committing to making a monthly gift or some other regular giving increased by 6%. Those opposing changes cancel each other out. I see them as good news. Regular giving is more reliable, and supporters who give month after month after month tend to have a higher lifetime value and deeper connection to your work. So I'd rather see increases on both sides. I'd rather see cash giving up and also regular giving up. But this is a trade-off that I think most organizations should happily make to have more of the revenue shifted toward that reliable regular giving. A natural consequence of regular giving growing while cash giving declines is that regular giving becomes an increasingly larger portion of the overall revenue and increasingly important part of our programs. For organizations in the UK and Ireland, regular giving went from 42% of total revenue to 44%. And that outpaces your peers elsewhere in the US and other countries. We tend to see lower amounts of regular giving as a percentage of the overall giving levels. Rights organizations were really a standout here. They reported that 60% of their online revenue came through regular giving in 2023. There was a question in the chat about whether handouts and slides will be available as well as the recording. The answer is yes, we will be sharing the slides. Also, all the data is available on the website as well. As I said at the outset, the conversion figures that we're looking at here are £1 to $1.27, £1 to 110 in euros. So the 60 pound average cash gift was the equivalent of about $76 or about 66 euros. These are looking at the regular cash average gift over the course of 2023. So just to sum up, Online revenue was flat year over year. That really sort of hides the fact that the flat giving is 86% higher than it was just a couple of years ago. We were operating at that higher baseline. And as we look at the changes over time, we are seeing that cash giving has declined, regular giving has grown. And that really has been sort of the long-term story that we've been tracking in benchmarks over the last several years, not only in the UK and Ireland, but globally. Wherever we look, we see an increasing reliance, increasing willingness on the part of donors to give through regular giving, and one-time giving, cash giving being a less important part of fundraising for most organizations. Okay, I'm going to shift focus now and talk about one of our messaging channels, email.
Well, there's a question in the chat that I think is worth addressing overall, which was talking about the definition of regular giving. And I'll just read it. Is it possible to remind the definition of regular giving, and over that what period is that all online signups historically and their giving amount in the year in question, or only new RG signups in that year? When we're talking about the overall fundraising, we're talking about all RG giving, so like initial and subsequent gifts.
Okay. And that would include regular gifts that were begun in previous years. So if you started your monthly gift in January of 2022 and you kept on giving all through last year, that your full 12 months would be counted there and you didn't begin your gift in that year. All right, let's talk about email. Email is my favorite, so that's what I really want to talk about anyway. List growth has been really strong in the UK and Ireland over the past few years. We saw a 20% growth in email list size in 2023, 15% and 14% increases in the previous 2 years. So really great growth in subscriber bases. That's super important to maintaining a healthy program. For our other countries' nonprofits, the same period saw 7%, 3%, and 4% growth. So not quite as robust the growth, but continuing to see more subscribers over time. And that 20% increase in subscribers that we saw for groups in the UK and Ireland, that is a net increase in subscribers. So that takes into account new joins, as well as those who leave the list for whatever reason. On average, UK and Ireland nonprofits lost 4% of subscribers to bounces over the last year, and another 8% to unsubscribes. So those numbers are incorporated into this, so that 20% is net, including those losses that happened. So we're able to send more to more people. We have larger audiences, but each one of those email messages has become less likely to result in a click, a gift, or an online action. For fundraising messages, the average click-through rate, that's the percentage of message recipients who clicked on one of the buttons in the email or a link, the click-through rate was 1.1% for groups in the UK and Ireland. This represented a 14% drop from the previous year. The page completion rate, so that's the percentage of users who land on the donation page and actually complete a gift, was 31%. So just under a third of folks who land on the donation page actually make the gift. And then the response rate, which sort of summarizes all of the impacts of email, the percentage of recipients who completed a gift was 0.24%. Another way of thinking about that is that in order to generate a single donation, an email appeal needed to land in about 417 email inboxes. That's to generate one solitary donation, which if you're a person who spends a lot of their time writing emails, as I am, is a super depressing number to think about. So try not to think about it too much. For advocacy emails, the corresponding metrics tend to be a lot higher, but we also have seen declines year over year in those metrics. This is, again, not something that is brand new this year. This is sort of the long-term trajectory that we have seen, which is that individual email metrics tend to go down over time. And that has been a long-term trend with no real signs of letting up. It's hard to raise money on email, but it's really important. As we look at how valuable each message was for a nonprofit, for every 1,000 fundraising emails sent, UK and Ireland nonprofits were able to raise £89. The metric varied really widely among sectors. So for disaster and international aid organizations, they were an outlier. They raised £349 for every 1,000 fundraising emails sent. And that £89 overall average in the metric was 25% lower than it was in 2022. Really closely aligned with the decline in response rate, really similar to the drop we saw there for fundraising messages. So unsurprising, if we get a lower response rate, we're going to raise less money per message. Overall, UK and Ireland nonprofits sent 26 messages per subscriber over the course of 2023. The volume of messages was twice as high for those in other countries. So primarily US-based organizations are sending a lot more email. And this is, again, not a new thing. This is a trend we've seen for a long time. They sent 52 messages per subscriber for those groups outside in our study outside of the UK and Ireland. The difference is especially striking when we look at fundraising messages in particular. That is the dark blue that you're seeing here at the bottom of these charts. In the UK and Ireland, nonprofits sent an average of 12 fundraising appeals over the course of the full year. I will tell you, it is not unusual here in the US to send that many fundraising messages in December alone. That's about the volume that we are hitting. You can see that the fundraising average number of messages outside the UK and Ireland was 30 messages, so between 2 and 3 times as much. Here we're looking at the volume by month, and I think this tells part of that story. So some of the difference that we're seeing is simply sort of a higher baseline. For most months, organizations in the UK and Ireland sent about 2 email messages. They're sending one about every other week on average here. And if you look at outside the UK and Ireland, we're seeing about 3 or 4 messages per month, sort of average. And regardless of what is going on in the world, it could be March, it could be April, that's about what we're seeing. And then if we look specifically at November and December, the last 2 months of the year, we see a really big spike in the US in messaging volume. We see a lot more messaging going out. Some of this is due to Giving Tuesday, which has really grown into a big recognizable day of giving and generosity here in the US. I know it's sort of gaining traction around the world. And so that tends to drive some November. Usually Giving Tuesday falls in November. It's very weird. It's based on when we have Thanksgiving, which is the 4th Thursday in November. So it changes exactly when it is. It's not a good system, but it's what we have. That's my description of the US generally for you all. Some of it is about US tax law, which again, I'm 100% not going to get into with you all right now, but US tax law gives people an incentive to give, and the deadline for that is December 31st. But even without that, there is a natural deadline on December 31st, and deadlines like that help drive urgency. We know that that is the case across all of our messaging. There was also a long tradition of seeing this as a season of generosity and goodwill, all of that Charles Dickens stuff I'm sure you're all familiar with. And so much of the December messaging here in the US is really driven by those 2 factors. It's not so much about the tax law, it's not so much about Giving Tuesday. It really is, this is just a time when both supporters and organizations agree to think a lot about giving, to think a lot about the things that they care about in the world, and to make those asks repeatedly, to really be encouraging people to make their last gift of the year, to give before the deadline. Oftentimes, there are a lot of tactical decisions or elements built into this, things like matching gifts. But all of that sort of drives that spike in messaging that happens toward the last couple of months in the year. Here in the US, I know the context is a little bit different. There is change happening. This is the change in total email messages from 2022 to 2023. Total email volume for UK and Ireland nonprofits increased by 11% overall over the course of the year. The majority of that increase came from the number of fundraising messages being sent, which doubled roughly from the previous year. So a lot more. It seems like a major jump. As we saw, the average number of gifts was still only 12, so it's still not a huge volume. There's not a correct amount of volume to send, I would say, but from the perspective that we have here in the US, I look at these totals, I'm like, well, you could be sending more. You could squeeze in some more asks in there, and if you did, you'd probably see more revenue. That's what I would encourage you all to think about. So we have several factors moving in different directions. We have more subscribers, we have higher messaging volume, we have less response per message. All of those together added up to a 0% change in revenue year over year, driven by email and directly sourced email. I will say the impact of email is bigger than what we can source directly. Oftentimes we find that if we send emails out to a list, people who receive that email are more likely to search for the organization and make a gift or otherwise give without actually clicking through to the email. So this is just looking at those gifts that are directly sourced to a link in the email. We saw that revenue was flat and down a little bit for other countries and down a little bit for health organizations as well within the UK and Ireland. So the net result of more people getting more messages, but giving less frequently to each particular one is that we saw no change. But without that increase in audience, without that increase in volume, we very likely would have seen a decline in email revenue. Here we see the share of online revenue from email. We saw that in 2022, UK and Ireland organizations raised 6% of their online revenue from sourced directly to email, and that increased just a tad to 7% in 2023. Again, this is a little bit less than half of what we see for organizations in other countries in terms of the ratio of email revenue to all online revenue. Okay, this slide sums up everything I just said, so I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but it is there for you to review at your leisure. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Johanna, who's going to talk about mobile messaging.
Hi, everyone. I'm Johanna. I'm in the direct fundraising and advocacy area at M&R. I'm really excited to talk about mobile messaging this year because we've collected more data from participants than we ever have in the past. And I think it's a growing channel, so there's a lot of opportunity here. While we see kind of the way people are interacting with their email has been declining year over year, people are really interacting with their phones, which I think if you think about your own behavior, might be really relevant to you. But it is a challenging fundraising channel because as we've seen these like declines in email, and mobile messaging faces many of the same challenges, but we have a 160 character limit, and the audiences right now are smaller than email, but let's dig into it. So for every 1,000 email subscribers, we saw that groups had on average 79 mobile subscribers. So there's still a long way to go for groups to build the kind of lists on mobile that they have on email. But mobile audiences have been growing over the past few years. While the growth has been slowing, subscribers only increased 4% from 2022 to 2023. They're still representing growth, and the growth has been continuous over the past few years. Just as with email, all of these figures represent net growth, so accounting for both new subscribers and those who were removed from the list. As audience has been growing, so did the mobile message volume. The number of mobile messages that UK and Ireland nonprofits sent their subscribers this year grew 14% year over year, with much of the growth coming from an increase in fundraising messages. But that increase doesn't mean that nonprofits were overloading our phones with asks and appeals. There was a really wide range in the number of mobile messages that fundraising groups were sent. So those at the 25th percentile sent just 0.36 mobile appeals, which basically means subscribers didn't get any appeals at all. And at the 75th percentile, groups were sending about 9 messages per subscriber over the course of the year. So that's like a very different experience for people that were on those two lists. And even at that high end, that's still fewer mobile messages than emails. Nonprofits were sending about 12 fundraising emails, and we know that in the US, people were getting 30 fundraising emails. So it's still a much lower volume than if people are subscribed to your email file. So the question is, were these changes in audience sizes and number of messages resulting in more revenue? The change in mobile revenue overall was relatively flat from 2022 to 2023, growing just 1%. Cash giving grew 2%, and we saw a bit more of a spike in regular giving. But as we saw also in kind of overall giving, this has been a huge growth area over the past few years. And so this was more of a stabilization than I think an area for concern. This is kind of especially in the cash giving from 2021 to 2022, we saw huge growth in mobile giving. But mobile revenue continues to make up a really small share of overall online revenue. Mobile revenue as a share of overall online revenue declined from 2022 to 23 to just 1.7%. Mobile online revenue did grow by 1%, but it fell as a share of online giving because other channels outpaced mobile. So just kind of things balancing out here. So overall, what did we see? Mobile lists grew, mobile revenue grew a little bit, and regular mobile giving grew a lot. But since mobile revenue is still a small share of overall revenue, there's a lot of potential here. Okay, now we're coming to a very exciting section because there's a big deadline coming up relating to Google Analytics 4, and we want to make sure that it's on your radar. So before we kind of dive into website analytics, we have to talk about Google Analytics 4. As I'm sure everyone here might be painfully aware, in July of 2023, Google Analytics 4 officially replaced Universal Analytics, and with GA4, Google changed a lot of things. How users are tracked on the website, how commonly used metrics are defined, the default data retention settings for custom reports, and many more things. And they changed all of these things mid-year, leaving many of us playing catch up. And the change from UA to GA4 mid-2023 made Benchmark's website performance reporting very complicated. The bad news here is that we had a limited data set this year, and we weren't able to make full year-over-year comparisons. The good news is that our limited data set included the critical end-of-year period that is so important to many nonprofits, as Will already talked about. And the even better news is that we should be back to full year reporting next year with a full year of GA4 under our belts. But the important thing we wanted to make sure we mention here is that there is a huge deadline coming up related to Google Analytics on July 1st, which is in 4 days. So on July 1st, you will no longer be able to access any Universal Analytics properties, and all of the data will be deleted. So if you have any data that is in your old property that you want to make sure you retain, you need to export it and download it this week, because they will not be retaining that data anymore. So you might want to discuss, like, with your organization, if there's any of that old data that's critical for you to retain, and make sure that you have it exported and saved somewhere. We have a blog post about what you might want to save. We have some information about how to do that export. The other thing that we are recommending is that you update your current GA4 data retention settings, which are default set to 2 months to 14 months. So they are, you are retaining more of your data because the current default setting is 2 months. There's a lot more information in the blog post that we just linked, but this is a time-sensitive deadline if you haven't, your organization has not already made those changes. Okay, so that was a lot of like throat clearing about Google and all of that. I'm sure you're like, let's get back to the data. So overall, 46% of visits to nonprofits websites in our study came from organic traffic. Again, this is only November and December. We don't have any particular reason to think this metric would look substantially different throughout the entire year. So organic traffic is visitors who searched for a term and clicked on an unpaid result, excluding all other sources like social media, email, paid advertising, or people who directly entered the URL. Among those visitors who did go to the website and then clicked on the main donation form, 21% completed a gift on desktop and 22% on mobile. Participants self-select what donation form they think is their main donation page, though it's usually the big one on their website, like the big when you are on the homepage. And that is a higher percentage than in the kind of US and other countries segment. Of the traffic coming to the website, in the UK and Ireland, they saw about 70% of their traffic coming from users on mobile devices. That includes both phones and tablets, which is a higher percentage of mobile traffic than we're seeing here in the US. Mobile users also drove the majority of donation transactions for UK and Ireland nonprofits. So it's obviously really critical for websites and donation forms to be mobile optimized. But we can't discount those desktop users yet. Their giving is still making up the majority of donation revenue by a slight margin, driving 56% of donation revenue. Average gift was also higher for UK and Ireland desktop users than for mobile users, £84, about 99 euros, compared to £44, about 52 euros for mobile users. So we look forward to being able to report even more comprehensive data on web performance next year. But in the meantime, please don't forget our critical deadline, and you can read about that on our blog post. want to make sure that no one is missing any data that they want to be able to retain. Okay, now we're going to talk really quickly about some of the changes we're seeing across the social landscape and how organizations are evolving their digital strategies to reach more folks. So obviously in social, we're always seeing kind of new platforms and communities popping up. And so we're just kind of keeping track of what's evolving. A lot of organizations we work with are asking, do I need to build a presence on this new social platform? How should I prioritize this? And frankly, it can just be a lot to keep up with. 2023 was a year of big changes for social platforms. Elon Musk took over Twitter, or X, in November of 2022. We talk with clients all the time about how changes to that platform will impact their social media and communication strategy. It's definitely changing the way that organizations have traditionally used Twitter to support their social organic advocacy campaigns, as well as their earned media and PR strategy. Threads was launched in the summer of 2023 as Meta's response to the Twitter upheaval. So while 29% of organizations in our study had a presence on Threads, it really only reflects half a year of building a presence on that platform. That being said, nearly every organization in our study had a presence on the big three social media platforms. And even with the upheaval on Twitter and X in 2023, it didn't really seem like that had changed for the nonprofits in our study. So on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Facebook, it was essentially 100% adoption. There was also near universal adoption of LinkedIn among UK and Ireland nonprofits, and pretty widespread presence on YouTube. Looking at newer platforms, we're starting to see a lot of organizations on TikTok at more than half. I already mentioned about a third of people are trying out Threads. And then we saw a little bit of use of Snapchat and Reddit as well. Taking a look at how their following compared to this email list size, Facebook had a pretty much equal size to an organization's email list, about the same number of fans. The Instagram follower count was roughly half an organization's email list size. Twitter was about a third of an organization's email list size, and LinkedIn was about a tenth of an organization's email list size. TikTok followers are an order of magnitude smaller, with about 39 followers per 1,000 email subscribers. Which is all to say that nonprofits in most sectors have a long way to go to build the kind of audiences on TikTok that they have developed on these more mature platforms. There are outliers here, though. In the disaster and international aid space, organizations have nearly the same size audience as they do on their email file. As we can see, the social landscape is still pretty fragmented, and we may see a new dominant social platform emerge, but right now, with kind of the situation in Meta struggling to balance its properties, we are seeing a lot of talk about potential restrictions on TikTok coming out of the US. There is still a lot of tumult happening on X and Twitter. We still don't have good insight into where organizations should be moving. And so I think we're all just watching and trying to do our best to communicate where our followers are.
All right, thanks, Joanna. Hi, my name's Teresa Bugeaud. I'm the Director of Data Analytics at M&R. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. This is my 13th year on Benchmarks, and I've been involved with all of the UK versions of the study as well. I'm going to talk today about advertising, and this is a really exciting year for the ad study because we are bringing back some of the content that was new last year, like Google Grants. I know people were very interested in that last year. And we're bringing in some new content this year, and we have benchmarks on non-digital ad spend. And throughout these charts, we're really just trying to discern how nonprofits are preparing for some major changes to the ads industry. It's a really exciting set of data, so I'm excited to get into it. A quick note about all of this: some of these charts do include digital and non-digital channels. Some just include one or the other. I'll try my best to signpost, but the chart titles will also clue you in if it is one or the other. Okay, so to start out, this is always a useful way to see how much groups are spending overall. So what we see here is that for every pound raised online, UK and Ireland nonprofits invested 17 pence. So that's about 20 cents in euros in digital advertising. To be clear, this is not a measure of return on investment. We're just comparing the size of digital advertising budgets with the total raised online from all sources. So the two sectors here with the highest ratio of digital ad spend to online revenue were health and wildlife animal welfare. These were also the sectors that reported the largest year-over-year increase in spending on advertising, which we'll see in the next chart. So overall, UK and Ireland nonprofits increased digital advertising spending by 23%. Spending by health nonprofits increased by 41%. And wildlife and animal welfare nonprofits increased spending by 29% compared to 2022. Thinking back to what Will talked about in the fundraising section, you might notice something interesting here. These are the two sectors that had the largest increase. These two sectors with the largest increase in digital ad spend. They also saw very different fundraising performance from each other in 2023. So health nonprofits reported 9% growth in revenue, most of any sector, and wildlife animal welfare nonprofits showed the largest decline with an 8% drop in revenue. So this could very well be because of the nature of pay to play media. So on the one hand, if an organization's seeing really strong fundraising results, it can be a lot easier to justify expanding investments in digital ads to make the most of a successful moment. On the other hand, if the organization's seeing declining revenue, it also might feel appropriate to use ads to make up for those losses. So now let's see how did groups split these budgets up. Across both digital and non-digital channels, the majority of digital advertising spending was for direct fundraising efforts. Within the UK and Ireland, direct fundraising was 75% of ad spending. Outside of the UK and Ireland, direct fundraising comprised 53% of spending. So search here was the most important digital channel for direct fundraising. That's in the second table, with 45% of all spending by UK and Ireland nonprofits. As we'll see in a few slides, search consistently has the highest return on ad spend of any digital channel. So it does make sense that nonprofits are trying to maximize their spending there. Most non-search spending was for display and social media advertising, but some nonprofits did try some emerging channels like digital video and connected TV, which you can see here are down at 2% and 5% of budgets. We can see the groups experimenting with this. We can see the increase here for connected TV and digital video. If you want to know more about the distinction between those two categories, you can see that on the right of this slide. It defines them more specifically. So this chart shows the change in investment in fundraising advertising for digital channels year over year. As we saw in the last chart, these less mature channels were a pretty small part of overall spending, but they did grow a lot in 2023. Spending on connected TV increased by 171%. Spending on digital video grew by 139%. That's a lot of growth in that area, in those channels. For the non-digital channels, linear television made up the bulk of the direct fundraising spending. So in the UK and Ireland, linear television made up 78% of non-digital fundraising advertising budgets. Print was a distant second at 17% of spending, and radio and out-of-home advertising were 2% and 3% of budgets, respectively. You can see the definitions here for those two categories if you want to know more. There are some distinctions, and although related, they definitely do have major differences. Okay, this chart shows the change in investment in fundraising advertising for those non-digital channels year over year. So you can see the increases in spending were spread across all different non-digital channels. The highest growth rate was in radio advertising with a 35% increase for organizations in the UK and Ireland. Compared to 2022, budgets increased by 16% for fundraising advertising in linear television. So as we saw a few charts ago, search advertising remained by far the most cost-effective digital channel. On average, it cost organizations in the UK and Ireland just £31 to generate a single donation via search. The cost per donation for Twitter or X was £47, which is less than half the average cost per donation on Meta of £100. So Will talked earlier about email list growth, and I know we've had a couple questions about this as well in the chat. So showing how much email list size increased, it increased 20% in 2023. Ads acquired leads helped drive a lot of that growth. The ratio of ads acquired leads to the start of your email list size was 0.16. So what that means is that an organization with an email list of 100,000 subscribers on the 1st of January 2023 would have added 16,000 new subscribers through advertising efforts over the course of the year. So really, this is just showing how much folks are investing in new ads acquired leads, or how much they're trying to grow their list compared to their start of year list. Now let's look at the costs for those new leads. So here we see cost per donation advertising lead by channel. For groups in the UK and Ireland, that's all that's shown in this chart. We do have the comparisons on the website to the other countries. The cost per acquisition buys, or CPA buys, delivered new leads most efficiently. So nonprofits spent just £1.89 for each new subscriber. TikTok is a relatively immature platform, so only some nonprofits have chosen to experiment there. And the cost for subscribers on TikTok was over £16, so it was a lot more expensive for lead advertising. On average, UK and Ireland nonprofits spend £2.57 to generate a single lead on Meta platforms. However, cost per lead ranged widely among nonprofits. So you can see here for that top row at the 25th percentile, Meta cost per lead was £1.88. At the 75th percentile, the cost per lead was £8.37. So the range shows the very real challenges of building a successful advertising program, especially on Meta. Even within a particular channel, differences in audiences, content, timing, issue, and message can all generate very different results. Also, with platforms like Meta, performance of lead generations campaigns might vary as Meta changes the way that the algorithm prioritizes some content. So it's important to make sure you're testing and optimizing your ads there to make sure you're getting your best results. And lastly, in the ad section, let's talk about spending that is not really spending. Google Grants promises nonprofits search placement that behaves like paid ads, but it has some heavy restrictions. There are 3 big restrictions that apply for Google Grants. First, they're run with ads credits. So while we're showing it here as pounds spent so that we can compare it to other spending, this is actually advertising doesn't represent actual money spent. Second, Google puts caps on the total budget and cost per click for grants ads, meaning nonprofits can only cover certain terms using grants. And third, the most important difference is that Google Grants search results appear below paid results, which makes users less likely to click on them. That all means that Google Grants ads were not nearly as effective as paid search efforts. The ROAS for Google Grants campaigns, return on ad spend again, was 3 pence for UK and Ireland nonprofits. You'll remember that the average ROAS for paid search was almost £2 compared to that. So even though Google Grant placements are free, the net return is still significantly lower than paid search. So to summarize the ad section quickly, nonprofits ad spend increased 23%. For every pound of revenue that nonprofits raised online, they spent 17 pence. Across all ads channels, the vast majority of spending was dedicated to direct fundraising. Within fundraising ad budgets for digital channels, search and social media were the largest share. And with fundraising ads for non-digital channels, linear television was the largest share. Spending on connected TV and digital video increased a lot, but they're still a relatively small part of fundraising budgets. And search advertising had the highest return on ad spend. So that is bringing us to the end of the ad section and actually the end of the charts we have to present, but we have plenty of time for questions, and I will turn it back to Paul or Will.
Thanks, Teresa. Lots of great questions that are in the Q&A right now, but maybe I just want to draw our attention to a question I saw in chat, which I really like the sound of, from Dan. Talking about Twitter's cost per donation, he asks, does that factor in paying for the premium to then being able to run ads on the platform? My assumption is not.
No, that's just actual spending directly on ads. It doesn't cover all the other costs that go into advertising, including paying for the premium and developing the creative and doing all those things. This is actually just the cost of the placements themselves.
Yeah. And there was a question earlier on from Helen when we were talking about email and email growth. She asked, is there data behind where this growth came from for email volume?
So we don't have data in the study about where list growth is coming from. We just have the numbers of overall email subscribers each month. But it is, I will say, it's reachable subscribers. So part of it could be that groups are figuring ways to retain. So as email lists are growing, actually, it's also reflecting that they're losing less. And as we talked about in the ad section, there is some investment in lead generation. I think Will had, if you had anything to add there.
No, yeah, we know that running ads, asking people to take an action or otherwise submit their email address is a big part of this. So much of what works and what we see growth in is doing things. So if you ask people to join your email list, they will join your email list more than if you don't ask them. That's like the most baseline thing. And all of the places where you can be asking are important. So the places where we're able to sort of increase that reach most easily is through ads, because it's just money. And it's a way that you can really directly drive it. But if you are making your email join prominent, if you're giving people reasons to care about the content you're putting out, then you can see that growth coming across different platforms. So you are likely seeing new subscribers coming in through your website, coming in through, if you have physical events, if you have a sign-up sheet, if you have advertising, all of those things sort of combine to drive email growth.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a comment from Dan in chat, which I think I'm going to ask anyone who's on the call who's advertising on Twitter to pop in with reflections that they have. Dan's point around Twitter is that the cost to advertise in the platform could be prohibitive to advertise there if the donations, even if the donations are cheap. Like, I have a view, but I'm not going to break client confidentiality on any specific results. But if anyone who's using Twitter to advertise wants to chime in on that point, I think it'll be really interesting context. We've got a fair old chunk of time left. We're more than happy for you to post questions in the chat or into the Q&A function. We've got the team from M&R and myself here until the questions run out, or 4:30. So please feel free to pop in whatever questions you may have.
I can answer one of these live to a question that we saw, which was, Twitter has a lower cost per donation. How do the volumes compare of Twitter versus Meta? As far as, I can't say offhand what the overall volume was. I do know that many fewer organizations reported having Twitter advertising. So it is based on, a large enough sample to make some assumptions, but it is a much smaller portion of organizations are doing it. And in the global study, we even asked groups if they were planning to stay on Twitter or made other plans. And we did see there is a large portion of nonprofits who are deciding to leave the platform and sunset accounts, which probably also has an effect there.
Yeah, I've seen a number of UK clients decide to remove themselves from Twitter because it's such a difficult place to be, specifically on issues around LGBTQ plus rights and refugee rights and those types of issues. So we see a couple, not a huge move away yet, but some organizations who've decided they don't want to be there anymore, which makes sense, I suppose. There's a question in chat around, do you have any particular tips on lead gen activity? We're doing all the steps and getting very slow lead increases. Any top tips from M&R for list growth?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I think so much of it is about your issue space and sort of your moment. So it is about putting relevant content in front of people, which feels like as I'm saying it, these are like the broadest platitudes that don't really give you anything to go on. But I will say, take a close look at your analytics. If you are seeing some actions do better than others, it's really worthwhile to take a look at what is happening there. It may be that some issues are more likely to draw people in. So if you're talking about this aspect of your work as opposed to that aspect, that may be what changes it. It may be that the way that you're presenting things can also be more or less effective. So I think take a really close audit to the places that you are seeing lead gen either succeed or fail, and really try to assess the differences between those. If you have the budget, by all means, please do invest in advertising that is directed around lead gen and trying to draw people into your email list. And then it really is about trying a lot of things. There's if there was a simple, easy way to do it, we'd all be doing it. So I don't think that we have any clients that find this to be super simple. It is a constant struggle to identify what's working and to try to shed those things that are not.
Yeah, I think from a very specific UK context, we see lots of email list growth activity. And I've chatted to the team at M&R many times before. I'm always really surprised from a Rally perspective, how high the cost per new email subscriber comes in at. We would regularly see our clients delivering below sort of £1.50 and £1.50, £1.75 if I get a little bit edgy and a little bit grumpy. In terms of how we see groups delivering really high performing list generation campaigns, we absolutely have a relentless focus on the user experience of the email sign-up pages, and making sure that we are really presenting really clear, really stark articulations of your values, so that people who land on those pages from Facebook advertising or other sources, we are removing all of the friction out of making the decision to carry on and give you their email address. One of the top tips that I've seen really play through, and I love it because it's so geeky, it makes me happy, is to spend lots and lots of time optimizing your opt-in copy to make sure that that's carrying your proposition into the opt-in statements. And you'll notice on quite a lot of hand raisers that I know that the Impact Stack platform will offer, and also the guys at Forward Action do, is when people select no to opt in, there's a kind of a nudge statement to move people back to yes. I've seen some phenomenal results, there. I'm going to stick into chat as well a deck that Rally produces, which is just jam-packed full of ideas we've borrowed from other people and like to share, because there are quite a few good list growth activities in there as well. Other questions? I like this question. Were there any surprises in this year's results, and do you have any key takeaways or recommendations for the sector?
I have a sad surprise, but that is that the data coming in, I'm the data person. The data coming in from social media platforms and from Google Analytics 4, we requested a lot of data that the reporting either changed drastically or was very incomplete. Things like Facebook fundraising data and other social media metadata that we've collected before. And then this complication with the GA4 data retention, we only had a couple months of data for a lot of people, or we had like kind of spotty data for the year. So just in a sad data person point of view, I was surprised at how much data was not as usable as previous years.
Yeah. I think I'd name my surprise at the debate that's raging in chat around Twitter. I'm always surprised at how well and how low the cost per new supporter can be in that channel, taking into account what Dan was saying in chat about the premium that it costs to advertise there. Viv has got a great question. You mentioned the importance of asking people to join your list in driving email list growth. Do you have any data on what types of opt-in works best in terms of volume and quality of leads? I have a response to that question from a UK perspective, Viv, and I mean, I always look at your organization and take huge amounts of inspiration from the work that you do on this. One of the things we've seen recently is if we're offering something downloadable and we're making it very clear that you are signing up and then you can download the asset that we're proposing, we see much higher opt-in rates when we're doing that compared to a more general values-based kind of hand raiser when we're looking at list growth. And I will give you a number because it's anonymized. We were looking at results recently for a client and we saw a 75% opt-in rate on something where we were asking, where we were offering a download, and we saw closer to a 60% opt-in rate when it was a more classic kind of hand raiser. Those results are not statistically significant, but that's just to give you a flavor of the types of things that we've seen. A question from Bruce on SMS. Surprised to see that SMS is still significant. I get the impression that the interpretation of GDPR had pretty well killed that here in Ireland. Plus, there are so many spam, scam texts that this channel is discredited. What about WhatsApp? I have a UK perspective, but I thought I'd let my friends from the US give their perspective if they have one to offer.
It's a pretty small portion of the overall fundraising. I think that we certainly have clients that we work with who have been able to build a very large and significant mobile list and are able to, especially in rapid response sort of emergency moments, really see a lot of great results. So I think that's one of the key distinctions, is that sort of we have other channels that are really great for sort of ongoing outreach and fundraising. So we see that in the mail, we see that in email. It's sort of always a steady drumbeat over time. SMS, we tend to see stronger results when it is something that you're getting out quickly in response to something that has changed in the world. So whether that's an earthquake somewhere in the world that you're responding to, or something changing in the political environment that is relevant to your issues, being able to get out quickly and say, this is that we're going to tell you the news, we're going to give you something that you can do about your feelings about the news. That can be really helpful. I think that that's the place where it does the best. In terms of the level of trust and the continued growth, I think there are real questions. I think you're absolutely right to point to the sort of prevalence of scams and spam, that people just messaging they don't want. So there's a real danger that those people are going to ruin it for the rest of us. And by those people, at least here in the US, I very much mean political campaigns and electoral politics, which are really abusing the lack of rules that we have and making it much more difficult for nonprofits to send legitimate fundraising messages. So I think there's real questions about sort of the future of it, and sort of whether we will able to see that platform get to the place that we have seen email grow to, that we have seen other channels grow to, or whether it's going to sort of stumble because of the difficulties of trust. But I would say rapid response is probably your best bet to try to get some traction there.
And Bruce, from a UK perspective, and I must confess I am not into the intricacies of how this market has developed in Ireland, but I know in the UK that SMS was used basically as a kind of lead generation activity to collect telephone numbers, where then people would then be called and asked for regular gifts. And I think that the sector's focus on that in the UK may have made us blind to the opportunities of SMS as a vehicle for communication, rather than a vehicle to generate a telephone number for calling. I see Greenpeace doing great stuff on SMS here in the UK. I get SMS messages which don't sit alongside my email experience with Greenpeace, which are prompting me and nudging me to interesting things that are happening. I also think that you mentioned WhatsApp. I think WhatsApp is going to be something we should really be taking a close look at. I was recently in conversation with a big campaign group in the UK who have used WhatsApp to as an alternative channel for their most engaged people on their email lists, and they're getting higher open rates in WhatsApp and higher donation rates in WhatsApp and higher average values in WhatsApp. Again, the numbers are very small, and I haven't seen lots of groups use that channel yet, but I think it's a channel we should all be paying a lot of attention to. There's a question from Emerson on the Q&A, which I'll put to M&R. Are there any learnings either in the results or generally around email income? Are charities branching out beyond appeals in any interesting directions? e.g. product approaches?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that I've seen and we've seen work well for our clients in terms of raising money via email without making it be a direct, without just asking for, without sending more appeals. I think so. Send more appeals. So I think that is actually the easiest thing, and this can be done in a wide variety of ways. But I would say what we typically do is we organize around campaigns. So we might say we are trying to raise X amount of dollars by June 30th, and we need your help before that deadline. And we might send 3 or 4 or 5 messages in the week-ish ahead of that deadline to sort of drive and create a sense of moment. So I think creating a sense of moment is a really big part of this. That can be a particular day that is important to your organization. It can be the end of a fundraising period, the end of your fiscal year, whatever it might be, and just create a sense of moment. I think that's a big part of it. In addition to that, we often see really great fundraising results from non-fundraising asks that capture a moment as well. So we might ask people to sign a petition or an open letter or make a statement of support of some sort. And when that is compelling, we ask people to do that. You fill out this form to add your name or sign your card, and then you land on a fundraising page at the end of that. And so what we have there are people who are invested in the moment, in the cause, whatever it is, and they've sort of committed, at least verbally, at least an intent to supporting that cause. When you follow that up, they land, they're finished filling out the form, and then they land a donation page that says, now take the next step. Do the thing that really shows your commitment, that really will make a difference. We will often see fundraising results equivalent to what a direct appeal would raise without actually having to land another direct appeal in somebody's inbox.
Brilliant. I'm going to take the next one. Any theories as to why people are opting to make regular gifts instead of one-time donations? What I see in the UK, and I've seen this in some of the Irish charities that I support, I think we're asking more often, or we're presenting the regular giving proposition more often in some of our emails, and also improving the way we're signposting regular giving on the website.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of user preference and nonprofit tactics. The biggest thing that I have seen make a difference is really just what is the default that you show people when they land on a donation page. So it can help to send an email saying, please become a regular donor. But what really makes a difference is anybody who lands on a donation page sees that regular gift option first before and defaulting to that. We're seeing more and more nonprofits defaulting to regular giving.
The other thing I want to know, and this is just from the global study because we don't have the same level of data for the UK study, but we looked at this year how many additional one-time gifts are made by regular, or cash gifts are made by regular givers, or we say one-time gifts versus sustainer givers. And about 20% of monthly givers are still making gifts, are making an additional one-time gift throughout the year. So you're not just getting the monthly gifts from them or the regular gifts from them. You're also continuing to get some additional cash gifts. And as long as you're focusing on retaining those same people, you're probably going to see more yearly value from those folks year over year.
Yeah. There's a comment in chat from Thomas where he says the growth in regular giving is counterintuitive to the general economic pressures supporters have been under, the cost of living crisis, etc., which I 100% acknowledge, and it's something seen across the entire Rally client base. I think where we may have seen these improvements, I definitely have seen, well, Rally clients put more of a focus on doing regular giving drives, leaning into the American kind of regular giving drive or donation week type approach, and also an absolutely ruthless and relentless focus on the user experience we present when we're trying to convert someone to regular gift. I think the number that always surprises me again is that conversion rate number that we see presented, that only 21% of people who land on a page with intent to do something actually end up doing it. And I think we could spend a lot more time as a sector really optimizing those pages. And nothing gives me more fun than being involved in those types of conversations, because I am king of the nerds. There's a question from Zoe, which I don't know the answer to, but maybe somebody at M&R would. Did you gather any data on engagement and list growth through app downloads or notifications? We did not.
We did not. That would be very interesting. I do wonder how many groups that applies to. It's probably a relatively small number of nonprofits, but I would be really interested to see.
So a question from Kim, did you see any major differences between advocacy comms versus fundraising? e.g. something that worked for fundraising that really didn't for advocacy or vice versa?
So I think typically, well, so one, we see stronger results in email, especially in the metrics in advocacy messages. So what we're asking people to do is click through to sign a petition or whatever it might be. We will see higher rates consistently across the board, but by really significant margins. So when I was saying earlier, oftentimes an advocacy message can drive fundraising just as well. Part of that is that you're getting more people actually onto your webpage, onto the action, onto that page, and thinking about how they want to support your cause. So that's part of it. In terms of the moments or the causes or sort of the opportunities, it really depends on your issue space, but my approach typically is to default to fundraising because that's what I care about the most, because of my greed. But oftentimes that's not the best thing. It's not the thing that makes the most sense. So I think the real question in any particular moment is, who are the people who can influence whatever is the change that you want to see in the world? And if what you are seeing is it's a government policy and you need somebody who's a decision maker or a corporate policy, you need them to change, oftentimes what feels the most meaningful, what feels the way to affect change, is to go yell at those people. And when that's the case, that's an opportunity for advocacy, followed by a fundraising message. Sometimes it's not clear who is going to change it, or we are the ones changing it. You know, when there's a natural disaster and people need help and they need food and clean water and all those things, an advocacy message saying I believe those things is obviously not going to be the most productive thing. What you need are resources. And so really just thinking about what's going to feel the most meaningful and be the most meaningful to your audience, and trying to match that up with what you can do as an organization to create the biggest difference. It's much more that than like there are some topics that are more advocacy and some that are more fundraising, I would say.
And I think from our perspective on that question, from the work that we're doing and seeing happen in the UK, I mean, I don't think it comes for a surprise to anyone who knows us, we are huge advocates of what we frame as a mobilization approach, which is absolutely operating at the intersection of the advocacy team, the comms team, and the fundraising team, and trying to define and produce digital communication programs that are not born out of a single team's goal or objective, but are born out of the shared objectives that sit across those functions. So I think where we're seeing success, we are seeing a much more blended approach to those communications, where we are communicating people based on the kind of answer to the question of what is the most impactful thing they could do with us today to enable us to win. That could be an advocacy ask, that could be a fundraising ask, but we're constantly presenting those asks in the same kind of tone of voice and with the same framing. So we're seeing that distinction start to move away in terms of how we frame that. I hope that answers your question, Kim. It was a great question. I think a question from Jonathan on the data with regards to regular giving volume, number of signups. Do we know if this was in growth too, or do we just have revenue data?
That's a good question. I think we just report on the revenue totals. We don't have the count of gifts totals. It becomes a little bit harder to parse when you're talking about number of gifts with RG, because if people are retaining better, you're going to have more. It might not be new, and we don't have a distinction between new and like ongoing. So it's a little bit harder to tell for this.
Thank you. Another question, did we notice a difference in metrics between international, national and regional charities? I don't think we looked at that as a specific subset, did we?
No, we don't look at it as a subset. I will say within the sectors, if you look at the participant list, some of the sectors tend to be more internationally focused, nationally focused, and regionally. So you could maybe make some kind of look at that to interpret it. I know that within the global study and within the US groups, like our hunger poverty sector is like dominated by food banks. And so you can see the regional effect in that sector like a lot, because it's really affected by its regionality. And so I think that's probably your best bet, is to look at like individual participants and see where they fall within sectors. But no, we don't look at it that way. Although it's kind of an interesting way to break things out.
I think the next question is very much a UK specific one, unless you do this sort of stuff in the US. So the comment, the question is, you said regular giving is doing better now. Is this old school, simple monthly giving, or are you seeing that regular giving needs that boost of being part of a creative, incentivized giving program? Things like Mind sending wellness boxes, offering stories of hope and virtual monthly events, calling it something like sponsorship and offering connection to beneficiaries. I'm happy to take that one if you're happy for me to take that one. I think that perfecting the core regular giving proposition, perfecting the user experience, and working with your ads in a genuinely kind of optimizing every day and improving creatives, testing new creatives and all of those types of things. I think if you do all of the basics really well, I'd be surprised if you needed a product to fix a regular giving challenge that you may have. But I think that's only true up to a certain point. I think once you've really immersed into the market and you're getting and you feel like you're kind of maxing out with the regular giving, the kind of cool regular giving product as I've just described, I think then the kind of diversification into some of these other product type approaches are interesting. My note of caution on all of those types of offer is just to be absolutely nailed onto the supporter attrition rates to make sure that people who are buying into a product or some kind of value are as loyal or loyal enough in terms of your models to hang around. And the thing I get really excited about, which I don't think we do enough of in the UK and Ireland by a long, long stretch, is diversification of payment mechanism at the point of offering the regular gift. We tend to, if you were to mystery shop lots of charity websites in the UK and Ireland, I would suggest that we dominate that our approaches where we're obsessed by direct debit. And if you think about how we buy our taxis, pay for our Netflix subscriptions and all those types of things, the credit cards, Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of these other payment mechanisms come into the fore. And I would love to see a year of testing with alternative payment mechanisms in the UK and Ireland to see if you can drive up response that way. I don't think not everyone wants the direct debit type approach. So that's a monologue from the UK. Do you guys have anything to add before we move on to the next one?
I think you touched on this. The one thing I would definitely say is make sure if you have an incentivized program that you're definitely looking at retention rates split across, because we definitely had programs where people were looking at the overall sustained retention and were confused why everything dropped off. And then once you separated it out, they realized that all of the incentivized folks joined for a month and then dropped off. So just make sure that you're really looking at it, looking at those distinctly.
Yeah, brilliant. Any further tips when improving retention and further giving engagement from donors when optimizing your new regular giving email journey? I have, again, a very simplistic approach to this. I think sometimes when we recruit new regular donors, we're worried about communicating with them. We think we're going to maybe remind them they've got their direct debit or their regular gift, and that they may recoil in horror that they've done the thing. And I don't want this to sound like a rally ad, we promote the approach that if we've managed to inspire someone to give, then we need to make sure that we don't just talk to them about their donation and that we're constantly talking to them about other things they can do to help organization X hit its vision. And I think there's a layer of discomfort in that in the UK in terms of what that means. So we fixate on linear welcome journeys so that we can kind of create the perfect experience at the point of recruitment. I don't know if this is advice, but something I'm starting to play with is, should we have very short welcome journeys and a much better everyday email program so that we're dropping people into really relevant of the moment content much more quickly than the 6-week regular gift email welcome program that we do. But I may be dismissed as being insane for saying such a thing. So if I'm saying
I'm curious, how long is a welcome series that you're saying we need to have them be shorter? Like what are you typically seeing in the UK?
I've very regularly see for new regular givers like welcome series that can run to 6 or 7 emails over a kind of 6 to 8 week period.
Yeah, we'll do. That's definitely not typical
Yeah.
among U.S. nonprofits. So we will a welcome series, and for most of the welcome series that our clients work on in the U.S. context, the welcome series is going to go out to anybody who is a new subscriber to the email list. Is typically how that's defined, and so it's not only for new regular givers, but anybody who's new to the list. And typically that will be 2 or 3 messages sent over 10 days after joining, and then back into the regular stream. I think, but I think it really is very much aligned with what you were describing, which is these are people who have said through their actions that they really care about your cause, your organization, the issue that you're working on. And so to cut off communication with them because you're afraid that they won't be interested, I think is really counterintuitive. I think it makes sense to say, you care about this, so we're going to tell you about it. The other thing is that we do see that in the highest open rates we're going to get, the highest click-through rates we're going to get are typically in the first 2 or 3 messages that somebody receives. That's when they're paying the most attention, and they start ignoring you over time, like any relationship. And so it's really important to get those right. And so sometimes you have some great offer that you can put in your welcome message, something really meaningful to them. But very often what they care about is whatever inspired them to give. And if something happening right now is what inspired them to give, that's what they want to hear about. So say, we're not going to tell you about current events for 6 or 8 weeks, I think just sort of like misunderstands why people are there and what they want to hear about.
Absolutely. And there's one more question in the Q&A, which I'm going to defer to one of you two to. It is, was there much variation in how participants used attribution methodologies to report, e.g. Google Analytics versus survey data versus third-party modeling? What was the dominant way of reporting channel performance? Example, Google Analytics.
I think we collect data in sort of a few different ways. So when we're talking about the different channels, it's sort of reported based on that individual channel. So email results, we're usually relying on CRM, donation, and so whatever that attribution is back to email results. For overall transactions, we're just relying on organizations to tell us how things fall, and it's usually just going to be by year and by cash giving versus regular giving, so kind of broad buckets. And then for advertising, we specifically ask folks to use a last touch attribution model. So that's however they're tracking it within their ads. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see in our report, like this portion comes from, like we don't add the ads revenue to other revenues to make up a total, because the ads revenue, some of it likely has like some overlap with some of these other categories because we're using this type of attribution model. So it's 100% of post view and 100% of post click conversions. So that's likely coming from someone's advertising reporting, and that could be from whatever platforms they're using.
Brilliant.
Let me know if that doesn't answer exactly what you're asking for, but it is a little bit tricky because it's really dependent on the channel and dependent on the organization and their CRMs.
Excellent. We are approaching the end of our time together. It's coming up to 25 minutes past 4 in the UK and Ireland. If no more questions emerge, I'm going to start to bring us to a close. Big thank you to the 46 participants who shared their data and went through that moment in early February. It must feel like such a long time ago, to provide us the data so that we could analyze the data for you and produce the report. All those people who participated and shared data will be getting their personalized decks, which compare them to the sector they're in and a bunch of other metrics through July. We are going to be repeating the program. We're going to have a couple of months away from benchmarks, and then we're going to probably come back towards the end of August and start promoting participation in the 2025 study. We would love anyone who's left on the call. I think when I looked, there are 162 of you who hasn't participated, to get involved or speak to me here in the UK. You can find my contact details on the website, and let's start talking about how we can improve even further our data set and get a richer set of data for 2025. Huge thanks to my friends at M&R. They're amazing people. I love them. I am a huge super fan. The form to register your interest is in chat and it's whipping through as people say thanks, but we'll see it on the website. And thank you very much for all your questions. It's been brilliant. And thank you, Teresa and Joanna and Will.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye,
Thanks
everybody.
everybody for joining.
Thanks so much. Thanks for all the great questions.